go to people and say, we need to make your life easier. Like, how do we get this work off your plate? Or being able to tell the salesperson, I'm not asking you to enter more data. The good news is the data is already there. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to help you increase your own close rate. I'm not coming with a stick. I'm coming with a carrot that says, we can now solve this problem for you.
Hey everybody, I'm Andy from Glide, and this is our second Innovators at Work, a series all about putting innovation into action for you and your team. And today we are talking about how to turn your data into business outcomes. Joining me to talk about it is David Blonski, COO at Elementum. David, thanks for the time today.
Andy, great to be here.
All right, so before we get into the meat, I would love to get a little bit of context going. So I want to make sure I got this right. Elementum's mission is to be the data-powered execution engine for the modern enterprise. What does that mean exactly?
I like this. Holding me accountable to the mission statement, right? It can't just be marketing. What does it mean? There's one word in there that's really, really critical, and that's the execution piece. Gartner has this stat that 90% of businesses describe themselves as data-driven. My experience, 10% at best. 90% is garbage, because what is considered data-driven is really more like data-informed, of like, yeah, I have data, I look at data, but there's a big, big gap between data-adjacent and data-driven. And that's really what we're trying to close here, and that gap is on the execution. Am I actually using data to do work in my business? And if you don't know what I mean by that, then the answer is no, you do not. And the easiest sniff test to this is look at your colleague next to you. Your colleague next to you doesn't show up for a day. Maybe you notice, maybe you don't. Your colleague doesn't show up for a week, and you notice, because that work's falling on you. Your colleague is MIA, and now you're doing the work of two people. That data should be as irreplaceable as that person next to you. The work that they are doing is work that your data should actually be able to do, that we can do today. So that is the push, is to go and truly be powered by data to execute in our businesses, just like our best colleague might do, to free us up to do more, and for our business, that modern enterprise, which is really what we mean by the sustaining going businesses of the next 50 years, will have data as equivalent to the best people doing work for the business.
I love the ambition of that, and I want to ground it a little bit. Yeah. So can you give us some real practical examples of what that looks like?
And do you have kids?
Yes.
Okay. So at home, you have subscriptions to Disney Plus and Hulu and Netflix and Amazon Prime and HBO and Paramount and Peacock, and like you got the list, right?
Yeah, so we got the list.
You got the list. And at any given time, you're not really sure which ones are we using, how many people, like, are we in a family? Like, did I loan this out to my friends? Am I using my parents? Like, I don't really know, and I'd like to turn them off, but every 6 months HBO comes out with that great show, and I just I gotta watch that one, or maybe there's that one on Paramount Plus that I just like, it's just that one show that I want to watch. So take this problem that we can all relate to, that we all do, and now apply it to a company that has hundreds, thousands of employees and is spending hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of dollars on software licenses every year. And they're saying, come renewal time, I don't know, like, should I renew? How many people should I renew for? At what price should I renew? What's right here? So this is an area where we can look who's actually logging in, compare that to the contract terms, and say, no, this person hasn't logged in. Or we can be smart and say, this person won't log in. Like, I understand that these other people need this license, but that's because they're involved in these projects. This person isn't involved in this project. They don't need that license. We can actively, dynamically manage who has access to those licenses. And by the way, we can also predict, based on the next projects that are coming, based on the needs, just like HBO comes out with its next Game of Thrones sequel. Andy, you just happen to be a Game of Thrones fanatic. Let's bring your license back. We can be dynamic with that, because right now, 50% of software licenses and businesses go unused. Waste. Use data to identify and automatically revoke unused licenses so you're running lean and mean. So that's one example. Another example, I use it to manage my sales team, my opportunities at risk, right? We're forecasting every quarter. And if we haven't had a meeting in 2 weeks, I'm concerned. If we're getting closer to close, we haven't had an executive alignment session, I'm concerned. I want to know about that. If we provide an ROI analysis and it's coming in low, we should know about that. If we still haven't met with procurement, we have not received their red lines, and my salesperson is saying, this is closing this month, I'm saying nonsense. And right now, we have that data in HubSpot and Salesforce, but it's really hard. And small companies don't have access to administrators. Big companies have a huge line for their admins, for their system admins. We can now orchestrate this on top with that data to be able to manage this. Third example I'll give you. These first two are sort of what I would say as impactful ROI, but they're not, say, transforming humankind. We also work with some of this country's largest healthcare payers. And so we all know I applied for insurance and the horror stories of that claim getting denied. Why is that claim getting denied? Because there simply aren't enough people to look at every single claim. As a result, the default is to say no. But the data is there for us to be able to look at, for that default to be yes, of that this is a claim that should be approved. And we don't need to go through rows and rows of people to manage that. We don't have to wait for the person to follow up and say, no, this is important. So that way we naturally filter it down. No, we can actually, and we are using data now to change these acceptance rates, because the businesses don't want to say no. Believe it or not, they don't want to say no to the wrong claims. That's bad for them. They just don't have enough people to do it the right way. But now with data, they can do it that way. And this is where we're really changing the game on things that not just pocketbooks, but truly people's lives.
It sounds like when we have these large volumes of data that we often default to things that may not be the best option, but it's what we think of as the safest option. We don't want to run the risk of doing the wrong thing, so we're just going to default to what we feel is safe. But in doing that, we're missing these opportunities to make improvements, do something better, operate more efficiently, even if it is subscribing and unsubscribing to to content for our kids. It all sounds really enticing. But what are the steps involved there? So I love what you're describing.
Yeah.
Practically, what does that take?
We don't want to think of this as a technology project. We want to think of this as a business problem that has to be solved. And when we're going in, hearing you talk, the thing that always stands out to me is we're resource constrained. Like, we could do these things if we had more people, or we could do these things if people could focus, or if we had the right types of people. And so there's a resourcing gap that's leading to problems within the business. Well, what is that problem? What is something that right now is top of mind for the CEO, the CFO, the head of sales? And they just can't get more people to do it. They don't have time. They don't have the right skill sets. So we start there. What is a problem? And you and I chatted about this before, is that this has to be a top 3 business problem. What's becoming really interesting is that the technology in the last 18 months has leapfrogged. The technology is fantastic, but the business processes are still very similar to where they were a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. And there is an inertia in a business to get to adopt something. We don't get people to adopt something and change their behavior by saying, look, I have a new tool. In fact, what we find is that people actually dig their heels in. They get skeptical of like, no. I'm not just trying this new thing for the sake of trying this new thing. Right? You need to go to people and say, hey, you're not able to get home until 8, 9 p.m. and have dinner with your family. Like, we need to make your life easier. Like, how do we get this work off your plate? Or being able to tell the salesperson of, I'm not asking you to enter more data. The good news is the data is already there. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to help you increase your own close rate from 60% to 80% on stage 2 and beyond, because we're going to be able to mitigate these risks, right? I'm not coming with a stick. I'm coming with a carrot that says, we can now solve this problem for you. We connect that now to one of these top 3 business priorities of we've got to improve our close rates. We've got to reduce our license spend. It's just bleeding us dry. We've got to be able to manage our approval rates. That we start with that problem, then from there we back into the how. And that's when we look and we say, okay, specifically, what data do I need to solve that problem? Don't start with, all right, data is important. I want to be data driven. Let's get all of our data. Let's get all of our ERP data. Let's get all of our warehouse data. Let's get all of our e-commerce data. No, because that has no success criteria. It has no end objective to it. You'll forever be cleaning, managing data. What's my problem that has real beneficial results? Exactly what data do I need for that? And now let me put that data in a centralized place that I can access it. And there's more that we can kind of go into on that middle step, but I think those at the two ends are the most important. One, ultimate business problem, top 3 business priority that gets people excited, that says, you solve that problem, I will forever be grateful to you. And then on the other end, exactly what specific data for that problem, exactly that data. Okay, once we have those two, we can converge and put a plan together.
What you're saying there about starting with the problem and the question, I think is really such an important call out, because when we see this at Glide, when you're connecting a bunch of data to, let's say you're building an app or an interface or something, you're connecting a bunch of data.
Yeah.
If you don't know really what you're trying to do with that data, it's completely overwhelming. There's just too much there to really know where to start. But if you're coming at it from the other direction of what is the problem that we're trying to solve, it sounds like whether it's building an app, figuring out better processes, finding opportunities, it's starting with that specific problem and then figuring out, okay, what selection of data do we need to address that problem?
Right. And we'll probably, and then you say, do I need that whole data right now? Like, everyone wants to crawl, walk, run their way to success. Like, that's the way to do this. Don't try to boil the ocean here. Even within that subset of data that I want, I can further start smaller to be like, okay, I'm going to start with this one product line. I'm going to start with this one site. I'm going to start with this one geography. You simplify it, because once you get the success with solving the problem, people are believers. And it's amazing how much easier it is to get data once the chief revenue officer has said, this solved my problem, get me more. Once the CFO has said, yes, this solved my problem, get me more. The data isn't clean. The data doesn't have proper governance to it. All those problems somehow become parallel path problems instead of prerequisites. Because now I've got the successes and I've got the business leader saying, let's go, baby.
One thing we haven't mentioned yet, but it's core, I think it's core to what you're doing at Elementum, is the AI component, AI, machine learning.
Yep.
What would you say to teams that are still skeptical about that? Like the fear that we're just on this other hype train around AI. What are your thoughts on that?
It's very intentional that I haven't talked about it. I haven't mentioned AI ML. That's because it's part of the solution. It isn't the why. It becomes the how. And that's where two things can be true at the same time, where AI ML LLMs can be transformational. They can be underhyped in many ways. And at the same time, the and is you can also be skeptical of, are these real? Are they risky? Do I get business value from that? So I'm going to anchor back again on the same tenets that you've heard me say before. What's a top 3 business problem that if I solve for somebody, they're going to thank me. I'm going to be their hero. They're going to tell my kids, the kids are going to be thankful. Solve that problem. Now, if the means to solving that is incorporating AI to read unstructured data in a contract, LLMs to be able to recommend the right next step, ML to identify true outliers, and you liked watching Bridgerton 1. Was that an outlier, or does that kind of match up because you got a pattern here, right? Like, I can be able to do this. So AI/ML is going to and is providing more value, exponential value than we've seen before. And don't just do it for its sake. If anybody's coming at you with, come buy my Copilot, be skeptical. Start with your business problem, and then based on that business problem, first principles, what's today's solution that I can solve? I was with somebody a couple weeks ago, and she's dying. Like her and her team, they are dying because they've been relying on this Excel file to manage their vendors since 2017, and it has turned from like one file into 10 different files with various macros built in, and she said for the first time about a month ago they made a mistake, and it was costly, it was painful, and they're worried it's just inevitable for the next mistake, right? Like, and she told me as we were kind of showing her how we'd solve this, she said, I looked for a solution a couple of years ago. Like I knew this problem was coming, but this didn't exist. Like I couldn't find this. I said, yeah, like it didn't exist 2 years ago. This only became possible 12 months ago, like realistically 12 months ago. So we're in a place here where we have new ways to solve things, but we got to make sure the reason we're solving them is because there's a business problem, and then we can first principles with the technology.
Way to fake it. Like, let's say you're not using AI, ML. You want to start with the problems. You have your data.
Yeah.
How can we do this the hard way?
Oh man, this is so funny. Just anecdotally, when I'm meeting with someone for the first time, I'm always orienting, of course, on the business problem, but then I have to tell them, okay, I don't need to do AI ML to solve this problem. I can solve so many things with basic heuristics that just take you, like, man, probably 3/4 of our customers, just helping them visualize their current process is an aha moment. They're like, oh my goodness, this is great. This is great, right? Like, then I progressed into automation. Do you have too much? Do you have too little? Are you too early? Are you too late? Just using the context of the data to automate workflows. From there, I can start applying AI, ML, LLMs to really get smarter and optimize. But that's progression there. Where like, I don't have to go right in with AI, ML. I really crawl, walk, run. If people are coming in and they're saying, use AI, ML to solve this, you should go. Like you should be alerted of like, wait a second, why are you trying to solve it? Like you should be solving my problem. If you're being pitched by a company that's been around since, we could be pretty rough here. I mean, anything pre-2010, like what do you do? Like this stuff is not, there's a reason why ChatGPT is, and you have OpenAI, and you have Midjourney, and you have even the stuff that we're doing with like Llama 3. These are things that are literally created from scratch in the last 5 years. If you're looking at a company, and we'll just, look, if you're looking at Salesforce, if you're looking at ServiceNow, if you're looking at Jira, if you're looking at Adobe, and they're going to have nice bolt-ons, they're going to have really, really nice marketing, right? They're going to have great marketing, but these are add-ons. These are kind of covers. It's the lipstick. It's the wrapper. That's not where you should be looking for innovation.
To that point, Emma posted this great comment in the chat here. People riding the AI wave because it's popular, but there are so many problems that are simple enough. They don't need an LLM or a GPT.
Yeah. Okay. And you may have to, for the folks who are on this call, the CEO of the company, the board, the board of directors is telling CEOs, you need to have an AI ML strategy. So they're kind of stuck in this middle here of like, all right, anything I do needs to have a path to AI ML, but realistically, I can solve this without it for the first few steps. So that's kind of the recommendation that when I'm consulting with one of our customers, one of our data execs, of like, you need your plan because your boss is being asked for it, his boss, her boss is being asked for it, and we can provide that to you. But you just need that plan. You just need that roadmap. And then we do the crawl, walk, run, and that can be in managing the scope. But we also do that by where do you start? When we work with pharma companies, we're not using AI ML with them in their drug development processes. We're doing it to identify contract exceptions, to better renegotiate contracts, to identify shadow spend. We work with financial institutions. We're not using it with their high net worth individuals to make stock trades, right? We're doing with them on managing their market data subscriptions. But over time, you earn the right with solving the back office, the lower risk problems, to then progress into what you'd call core business, customer facing. In our case, that could be working with the payers and the claims approvals. So you work your way up and you introduce these technologies and you prove them out in again, ways that solve real business problems.
We talked about this a little bit in our prep before too, the idea of finding those small wins, building that momentum. Do you have any really kind of like best practices, core tips for finding those opportunities, the small wins that you can just start building that momentum? What do you look for?
I mentioned this before, that the technology has really jumped step function, but the people and the processes are largely where they were culturally, mentally, still 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, and even more skeptical given the hype that's out there. So I was encouraged that start someplace that has minimal change management. That's why our example of software license management here is, I'm not asking people to go and learn a new process as part of this. I'm simply saying, here's a process that probably doesn't even exist right now, and we can start using data. So if we can minimize the impact, the changes that people have to make, that's a good place to start, because people are right to be skeptical. They need to be respected. They're already probably overworked, which is why you're trying to help them out. And then as you move, remember that you want the buy-in to come from a problem that people want to be solving, that gets them home in time for dinner, that helps them hit their quota more often. Let that be the reason to pull you in. The top-down doesn't really work these days. And you're going to find that your champions, your senior sponsors, are reluctant to push top-down because there isn't the appetite for that. So minimize the change management with your initial use cases, and then make sure that the carrots are there, that you're being asked for help, that this is something that the users are really going to appreciate and embrace.
And going from the other side, so I love that, but coming from the other side then, so if you want to do this, you know, we have our list of business problems, we have some small stuff we want to start with, but we're not sure that we have the data, or teams that don't believe that they have the data, the volume, and the shape that they need it. Have you run into that before? How do you deal with that?
All the time what I hear is, we're not ready. I think that's another way of saying that we're not mature enough. When you're offering automation, that's a step too far. When I hear that, or if I hear someone say, we don't really have data, I get excited, man. Like, that actually to me is this big green light of like, you have a successful business and you're not using any data, or like you don't think you have data. Like, oh my goodness, your mind is going to be blown once you start incorporating this and find out just how far you can go. Because these are people that have been using a hammer their whole lives. I'm like, I'm going to give you a tool belt. They're like, I'm going to give you some power tools. Like, imagine going from the screwdriver manually, and now I give you that automatic, the drill. You're like, this is crazy. So the data that you have, everybody has some report. Everybody has Excel files. Everybody has Excel files. So that data is there. You just need to talk to the right partner that's going to help you. And by the way, that right partner is going to say, again, don't worry about the data that you have. What's the business problem you have? What's the top 3 priority? Okay, well, how are you solving that now? Well, we have this Excel file, right? Okay, well, how are you getting the data for that Excel file? Well, people are entering it in. Oh, interesting. Where are they entering it in from? Well, we're capturing it from Microsoft Dynamics. We're capturing it from NetSuite. We're capturing it from Salesforce or HubSpot. Then we're putting it in. Oh, okay. Well, how about we automate that? Interesting. There's a problem. We're probably solving it some way today. We're probably using data. But it's going to be really cool when we go from the screwdriver to the power drill.
So it almost sounds like, you're talking to a team that says we don't have the data. Well, in fact, you do have the data. You just may not be aware that it exists or where it may be. Everybody has the data.
That's right. And then the concern comes in of like, well, what they're really saying is, I'm not ready to enable my data. I don't have the appetite to do that. And you know what? That's fine. Like, that's on you and me then, Andy, to say, here's how we can reduce the friction and make it worth your while. First of all, is this going to make the chief revenue officer happy, the CFO, the chief HR? Like, if that's going to make them happy, like if we can really truly solve one of their top killer problems, we can back in and we can then make sure that data is viable for them, because they're making They're making the decisions now. It could be through email and WhatsApp and attachments and phone calls and whatever. I'm pretty confident that's no more reliable than the data that we'd be able to get them. And it sure is a lot less inefficient than what we can offer with some automation.
Sticking with the topic of leadership. So coming from the other end, when we last spoke, you mentioned data leaders coming into an organization with these big mandates.
Yeah.
And then facing this preference of like, no, we're going to stick with the status quo. We don't really want to rock the boat. How do they overcome that reluctance to try something new?
They get fired and then they learn. Right? Like it's the CDO has the shortest tenure. The chief data officer has the shortest tenure of any C-level exec in the enterprise. Like this is well documented. It's under 2 years. That's because there's expectations of we need to be doing something with this data. Like you need to be driving business value. You can't just sit there and be aggregating data and put it into some data warehouse, normalizing governance. Go to CFO and say, yeah, I spent $1 million, but heck, our data governance is looking really good. And the CFO is going to say, get out of here. Like we need to be solving problems. So you don't have a choice. Like you have to do something. Now the question becomes, what do you do? And again, what problems can you solve? So this is really accelerated. I think there's been a big shift. The first wave of data leaders were really more lifelong IT leaders. And there's a distinction here. And I don't mean to generalize because there's phenomenal IT leaders, there's phenomenal people all over, but just for simplicity's sake, tended to be IT leaders who came in with an architecture landscape and said, okay, we should have a data warehouse. We should have some central repository. Let's get all of our data in there. Let's make sure the data quality is good. Let's make sure that we're managing, we have good data governance. And then these reports that we used to have that were dispersed, we'll now have one centralized source for them. And that was wave one. And they kind of peaked and said, okay, well, you didn't change anything in the business. You spent a whole lot of money to be able to do all that. And conceptually it made sense, but now what? And if you don't have a playbook of how you're actually gonna be a business partner, then it's just a matter of time. You count down the days. But the other way to look at this is that really it shouldn't be about the data leader that is reluctant or wants to maintain the status quo. It's really about the data leader who is saying, data has never, ever been more important, more powerful in the organization. The CDO used to be the cap. Like you would cap out there and you couldn't go anywhere else. The CDOs of today are going to become the COOs and the CEOs because that's where the value is. And what they need to be now is the change agents to show it, right? It's no longer a rest invest kind of role of like, okay, good, all the data's here. Let me take orders and fulfill subscriptions. No. It's like, this is now my path. And we see that. We see that with VPs coming up who are VPs of analytics and AI, VPs of AI and innovation, VPs of data strategy, who are saying, yeah, I'm going to be a CDO. And by the way, the CDO used to report to the CIO. Not anymore. The majority of CDOs are now peers to CIOs. And you're going to see the CIO potentially report to the CDO, the CTO report to the CTO, and see that progression because data really is such a differentiator.
So it sounds like, to summarize that, what used to be a case of, we're going to get our house in order, we're going to get our ship in order, we're going to get all the data, build out our data structures, build out our databases, great. Mm-hmm. And then we can put some reports and visualization on top of that. That those days are gone. Now it's leading with the strategy, leading with the outcomes, really. Mm-hmm. So we've flipped it around. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, and it's sort of like product development. Product development has a classic way of looking at it of first give me a skateboard, then give me a motorcycle, then give me a car. And there's a number of steps in between there as well. But that's really the mentality that the data team needs to have also, is that give me a skateboard that solves this problem. And then once I solve that problem, I'll be able to give you a motorcycle that solves more problems, that goes faster and bigger, and then I'll give you the car. And that means that over time, I will still incorporate those best practices, that I will get 4 tires instead of just 2 to be in more sound ground, right? Like I'm going to have more protections in there. I'm going to add some nice features. But if you try to build the traditional, let me have this strong foundation from which I will build upon, you're going to get in forever design mode. When a data person comes on and says, it's really interesting, but we gotta clean our data. Our data, we don't have good enough data quality for that. I tell them that getting your data quality perfection is like trying to tell me how many stars there are in the universe. You're just going to be going forever. It's never ever going to stop. That's always going to happen. Your data quality is a parallel process. Don't let great perfection be the enemy of good, because there's so much value. And I'll tell you, there are business leaders who are drowning right now, who are dying for help. And the fact is, we can actually help them with a lot easier than you think. We just need to connect those dots.
So I want to wrap up the questions here with kind of a final thought. What would your advice be to a mid-sized team? Let's say you're dealing with like 50 to 100 people. What's your one piece of advice for them to kind of sum it all up?
Obviously, you've heard me say, start with a business problem. That's a good piece. We haven't talked too much about it, and this is obviously sponsored by Glide, and I'm with Elementum. Find yourself a good partner. Like, you don't have to do this on your own, and you shouldn't be expected to do this all on your own. What you need to do is you need to bring the institution knowledge of the company that you're at, have an idea of what your business problem really is, and then find a good modern partner who's going to work with you, who's not going to just throw something at you, who's not going to leave in the middle of the night, but somebody who understands that data is an asset, and this is a long-term relationship to build with you.
David, thanks again for the time today. Thanks, everybody. And don't forget to subscribe for more events and sessions like this. All the links you need are going to be in the description down below, wherever you're watching this. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks,
Cheers.
Everyone.